Imagine this, the most powerful organization in the Middle Ages, richer than kings, with a private army that could crush any force in Europe, devoted entirely to protecting the Holy Faith. And then, one morning, they were wiped out, every single one of them, arrested, chained, and thrown into dungeons by the very king they once protected. So here's the question. Was this justice served on sinners, or was this the most elaborate robbery in human history? Tonight, we're going back more than 700 years to crack open one of the oldest black boxes in the world, the truth behind the fall of the Knights Templar, a brotherhood of warrior monks who became the world's first multinational bankers, before they were destroyed by charges so horrifying they still make your skin crawl. But were those charges real, or were they just a smokescreen for something far more mundane, greed? Let's rewind to the dawn of Friday, October 13th, 1307, early autumn in France. The air was still cold before sunrise. A thin mist hung over the fields and church rooftops, and while most people were still asleep, a violent pounding on doors echoed across the entire country. Not one door. Every Templar fortress, monastery, and command centre in France, all at once. Soldiers of King Philip IV, the King of France, known as Philip the Fair, stormed in and arrested every Templar they could find. The arrest warrants had been written on sealed documents sent to officers across the kingdom nearly a month in advance, with strict orders not to open them until the appointed date. Men in white cloaks bearing the Red Cross, men who had been feared on the battlefields of the Crusades, men who had protected tens of thousands of pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. They were dragged in chains and thrown into cold, damp underground cells in their own homeland. Even Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, the supreme leader of the Templars, a 70-year-old man who had spent his entire life on the battlefield, couldn't escape the chains that morning. But the story of the Knights Templar didn't start with chains and dungeons. It started with pure faith and extraordinary courage. Around 1099, Crusader armies from Europe captured Jerusalem. For the first time in centuries, the Holy City was in Christian hands. Faithful believers from all over Europe decided to make the pilgrimage to the Holy Land. But the roads from Europe to Jerusalem were incredibly dangerous. Bandits ambushed pilgrims along the way. Many were killed, many were captured and sold into slavery. In 1119, a French knight named Hugues de Payens and about 8 fellow knights decided to devote their lives to protecting these pilgrims. They approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem and asked for permission to form a religious military order. Baldwin agreed and gave them a wing of the royal palace on the Temple Mount. That location sat on what was believed to be the ruins of King Solomon's temple, and that's where the name came from, the Knights of the Temple, the Knights Templar. In the beginning, they were genuinely poor. Their symbol was 2 knights riding a single horse to show just how broke they were. They lived on donations, fasted regularly, prayed at every canonical hour, and took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They were warriors and monks at the same time, something the Christian world had never seen before. But the poverty didn't last long. They had a powerful supporter, Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential church figures of the era. Bernard was the abbot of Clairvaux and a nephew of André de Montbard, one of the founding knights. With Bernard's backing, the Templars received official recognition from Pope Honorius II at the Council of Troyes in January 1129. Bernard also drafted the order's rulebook, starting with 72 clauses that later grew into hundreds. Every detail of a knight's life was regulated, from clothing and horses to the absolute prohibition on touching any woman, even family members. The papal seal changed everything. From 9 poor knights, donations flooded in from every corner of Europe. Nobles donated land, kings gave castles, common people offered gold. Sons of aristocratic families lined up to join. In 1139, Pope Innocent II took it even further. He issued a special decree exempting the Templars from all taxes and all local laws. The order answered to the Pope alone. No king, no bishop, no ruler had any authority over them. The Knights Templar became a state within a state. Their armies crossed borders freely. Their property was tax-free. Local courts had no jurisdiction over them. They built nearly 1,000 fortresses and command centers across Europe and the Holy Land. At their peak, they had between 15,000 and 20,000 members. Only about 1 in 10 were actual fighting knights. The rest managed their vast network of property and finance. And this is where the story takes its most important turn. Because the Templars weren't just warriors, they gradually evolved into the most powerful financial institution in Europe. With their network of fortresses stretching from London to Jerusalem, they started offering a service no one had ever seen before: letters of credit. A pilgrim could deposit money at a Templar house back home, receive a document showing the value, and then withdraw funds at a Templar house in the Holy Land. No need to carry bags of gold across bandit-infested roads. Think about it. In an age with no banks, no credit cards, a group of knights who started out sharing 1 horse between 2 men built an international financial system. They didn't just hold deposits and issue letters of credit. They loaned money to kings and nobles, transferred funds between accounts, and managed royal treasuries. The French royal treasury itself was once kept inside the Templar fortress in Paris. At the height of their power, the Templars owned roughly 9,000 estates across Europe. Their wealth was beyond calculation. They were creditors to kings, custodians of the Pope's treasury. Their power rivaled the greatest rulers on the continent. But everything that rises must eventually fall, and the higher you climb, the harder you crash. Because there was one man staring at the Templars' fortune with hungry eyes, not a bandit, not an enemy of the faith, but the King of France himself, Philip IV, the Fair, the Templars' biggest debtor. In 1299, he borrowed 500,000 livres from them for his war against Flanders and his sister's dowry. The debt kept growing. The royal treasury kept shrinking. Philip had done this before. In 1291, he arrested Italian Lombard bankers, seized their assets, and forced them to buy French citizenship. In 1306, he expelled every Jew from France and took everything they owned. Both groups were creditors of the crown. Eliminating them didn't just erase the debt, it filled the treasury. The pattern was clear. Find a charge, arrest, seize, eliminate. And now, Philip's eyes locked onto the biggest target of all, the Knights Templar. The richest, the most powerful, and his biggest creditor. But taking down this giant wasn't as easy as dealing with bankers or Jewish merchants. The Templars had their own army, fortresses all over Europe, and they were under the direct protection of the Pope. Destroying them would require something more powerful than soldiers or lawyers. It would require the most devastating weapon of the Middle Ages, a charge of heresy. This was the beginning of one of the most cunning and brutal schemes in European history. A story that mixed faith with greed, truth with lies. And in the end, it taught a painful lesson: that wealth without political protection is nothing but an invitation to disaster. That night, the sound of chains hitting stone floors echoed through dungeons across France. Knights who once stood fearless against 1,000 enemies now sat in darkness. They knew only one thing: the life they had known was over, and what lay ahead might be worse than any battlefield they had ever faced. If you walked into a fortress in the middle of Paris 700 years ago, you wouldn't hear swords clashing against shields. You'd hear gold coins clinking together. You'd smell ink drying on animal skin parchment in underground vaults. And you'd hear quills scratching out debt figures so massive that even kings had to bow their heads. This wasn't a military camp. This was the most powerful bank of the Middle Ages, and its owners wore white cloaks with red crosses, the Knights Templar. To understand why the Templars were wiped out, you first need to understand how rich they were and where that wealth came from, because the answer to that question reveals the real motive behind everything. The story starts simply enough. 9 knights sharing one horse between 2 men. So poor they depended on charity just to survive. But within 30 years of their founding, everything changed. The papal seal of approval given in 1129 opened the floodgates to wealth. Donations poured in from every corner of Europe without stopping. Nobles donated land, kings handed over castles, common people gave gold. What they received wasn't just money. It was a set of privileges no organization had ever been given before. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a decree granting the Templars extraordinary rights. They were exempt from every kind of tax, even the tithes owed to the church. Their lands were treated like church property. No bishop, no lord, no king could tax them or judge them. They answered to the Pope alone, and the Pope was far away in Rome. Think about what those privileges meant in practice. The Templars could accumulate wealth without limits, no taxes, no tithes. Every coin that came in stayed with them. While nobles, merchants, and even other monasteries groaned under heavy tax burdens, the Templars were exempt from everything. Wealth piled up fast. But what truly set the Templars apart from every other rich organization in the Middle Ages wasn't just how much money they had, it was what they did with it. Around 1150, the Templars started issuing letters of credit. Here's how the system worked. Say you're a French nobleman heading to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage. Instead of hauling heavy bags of gold across the desert, risking robbery and murder, you just walk into your local Templar house, deposit everything, get a document showing what you've put in, then travel with nothing. When you reach a Templar house in Jerusalem, or anywhere along the way, you hand over that document and withdraw what you need. This is what the modern world calls a letter of credit, the foundation of all modern banking. Some historical records even suggest these documents were encrypted to prevent forgery. And this system was invented by a group of warriors who had sworn to live in poverty for the rest of their lives. But the Templars didn't stop at letters of credit. They gradually expanded their financial services across the board. They held assets for people of every social class, from kings to commoners. The Temple in London became a vault for English nobility. The Temple in Paris became the keeper of the French royal treasury. The Templars also transferred funds between accounts, loaned money to kings and nobles, and issued surety bonds. Everything a modern bank does, the Templars did it centuries earlier. If you were a king who needed war funds, you went to the Templars. If you were the Pope and needed to send money to the Holy Land, you deposited it with the Templars. If you were a noble who needed to keep your land deeds safe, you put them in a Templar vault. They became the financial hub of all of Europe. At the peak of their power, the Templars held roughly 9,000 estates scattered across Europe, nearly 1,000 command centres from Scotland to Jerusalem, from Portugal to Cyprus. They owned farms, vineyards, mills and ports. In England alone, they raised over 300,000 sheep, producing about 39,000 pounds of wool per year, a staggering share of their total income. All of this was managed systematically. Regional commanders, treasurers overseeing finances, sophisticated accounting systems, a rapid communication network linking every centre together. From 9 poor knights to an organisation of 15 to 20,000 members, only about 1 in 10 were fighters. The rest were administrators, craftsmen, accountants, and asset managers. This is the picture textbooks usually don't paint. When people think of the Knights Templar, they imagine warriors on horseback with swords and shields. But the truth is, they were bankers more than search warriors, and that's exactly what made them a target. Because among all the Templars' clients, there was one who was especially important and especially dangerous, King Philip IV of France. Philip came to the throne in 1285, at just 17 years old. He inherited a mountain of debt from his father and kept piling on more with endless wars against England, against Flanders, plus the enormous cost of running the kingdom. By 1286, his debt to the Templars alone was 8 tons of silver. That's roughly 17% of the entire French government's annual revenue. That one number tells you everything you need to know about what came next. But Philip wasn't the kind of king who bowed to anyone. They called him the Iron King, cold, rigid, unyielding. People obeyed him out of fear, not respect. The Bishop of Pamiers, one of his enemies, once said of Philip, "He's not a man, he's not a beast, he's a statue staring with empty eyes." And this statue had a clear playbook for dealing with creditors. In 1291, he arrested Italian Lombard bankers, seized their assets, and squeezed 250,000 livres tournois out of them by forcing them to buy French citizenship. In 1306, he expelled every Jew from France, confiscated everything they owned, pocketed at least 140,000 livres, then sent officers to collect the debts Jews had loaned to others. Funneling that money straight into the royal treasury, twice, 2 groups, same playbook: find a charge, arrest, seize, eliminate. In 1306, something happened that made everything crystal clear. Philip debased the currency so badly that the people of Paris rioted. He had to flee for his life into the Templar fortress in the heart of Paris. While those thick walls shielded him from the angry mob outside, Philip saw with his own eyes the staggering wealth hidden within. Vaults filled with gold, title deeds, secret ledgers. From that day on, Philip's eyes never left the Templars. But taking on the Templars was nothing like taking on Lombard bankers or Jews. The Templars weren't defenseless outsiders. They were a military order of the Church. They had their own army, fortresses across Europe, special privileges from the Pope, and allies in every royal court. Using force would mean civil war. Using ordinary law would be blocked by church authority. Philip needed a weapon more powerful than swords and statutes, a weapon that could destroy any organization in the medieval world in the blink of an eye. That weapon was a charge of heresy. Two words that, in that era, were as good as a death sentence. Because anyone found guilty of heresy lost everything: their property, their life. And no one dared defend them, for fear of being dragged down too. The Templars' wealth, which had once been their greatest strength, had now become their deadliest weakness. It made them a prize worth hunting. The fortune that built a financial empire spanning continents was the very thing that drew a crown-wearing predator. And when that predator wielded a weapon called heresy, no fortress, no army, and no amount of money could protect them. In the Middle Ages, there were two words more terrifying than any sword or army: heresy. Because the moment that word was spoken, the accused became an enemy of God. No lawyer, no right to defend yourself. No one dared speak up for you, because defending a heretic made you a heretic too. And this was the weapon King Philip IV chose to destroy the Knights Templar. But here's the thing. If you want to stiff a creditor who has their own army, you can't use ordinary law. You need to turn them from heroes into monsters first. And to do that, Philip needed two things: charges so horrifying that the public would be shocked into silence, and confessions from the Templars' own mouths. The charges didn't appear overnight. They were built up carefully, step by step. Around 1305, a man named Esquis de Floirin, a disgruntled former Templar, came to Philip with accusations against the order. He claimed there were terrifying secret rituals happening behind Templar walls. No one knows for sure if he was telling the truth or lying through his teeth. But for Philip, that didn't matter. What mattered was that he now had the excuse he needed. The charges that were cooked up were deliberately horrifying. They were designed to shock and disgust the general public. Most people in the Middle Ages couldn't read. Complex financial and political matters were way above their heads. But accusations of religious blasphemy? Those hit instantly and hit hard. The first charge was that Templars spat on the cross and trampled on sacred Christian symbols during their initiation ceremonies. The second was that they performed obscene kisses on each other's lower spine, navel, and mouth, symbolizing submission to dark forces. The third was that Templars engaged in sexual acts with each other, a grave sin in the eyes of the Church. The fourth was that Templars worshipped a demonic idol called Baphomet, a strange bearded head supposedly placed at the center of secret midnight rituals. And the final charge was financial corruption, squeezed in to add a veneer of plausibility to the outlandish religious claims. Imagine the impact of these charges in a medieval society, an era where religion was the center of everything, where demons and black magic were taken dead seriously. Telling people that the knights who defended the faith were actually spitting on the cross and worshipping Satan was like saying a doctor sworn to heal was actually a serial killer. It flipped everything people believed. But charges alone weren't enough. Philip needed evidence, and the most powerful evidence of that era was a confession from the accused themselves. The problem was, the Templars hadn't done any of what they were accused of. So how do you get innocent men to confess? The answer was torture. In the Middle Ages, there was a deeply held belief that if the accused was truly innocent, God would give them the strength to endure any pain. So if someone cracked and confessed, that was proof they were guilty. This twisted logic made torture a perfectly legitimate tool in the eyes of those in power, because no matter the outcome, the torturer always won. On the dawn of Friday, October 13th, 1307, Templars were arrested across France, thrown into dark, damp underground cells, and then the torture began. What happened behind those prison walls is one of the darkest chapters in European history. Prisoners were stretched on the rack until their joints popped out of their sockets. The crack of bones echoed through the silent dungeons. Some were hung by ropes tied behind their backs, then dropped suddenly, ripping their shoulders from their sockets in one sickening jolt. Others had their feet held over open flames, skin blistered into fluid-filled sacks. Fat melted and bubbled. The stench of burning flesh hung thick in the damp air. Records show that some knights were burned until the bones of their toes fell off entirely. Pulling out fingernails and toenails was another widely used method. Each nail pried off one by one, a sharp, piercing agony shooting through the entire body. Prisoners were kept from sleeping, starved, left in total darkness for days on end, until the mind began to dissolve, until the line between reality and hallucination started to blur. Under those conditions, people confess to anything. Think about it. If your bones were pulled from their sockets, if your feet were roasted over fire, if you hadn't slept in days and were seeing things that weren't there, and someone told you, just confess and the pain stops, what would you do? Would you keep insisting on the truth? Or would you say whatever they wanted to hear just to make it end? Most Templars made the same choice. They confessed. Even Jacques de Molay, the 70-year-old Grand Master, confessed under the pressure of torture. A man who had stood fearless on battlefields his entire life, who never flinched before enemy blades, was broken by pain inflicted by people of his own faith, in his own homeland. Those confessions were immediately broadcast to the public. The royal propaganda machine worked with ruthless efficiency. The news spread across Paris and all of France, read aloud in town squares and in front of churches. The crowds were stunned. Knights, once revered as symbols of courage and faith, became demons in the public eye overnight. No one questioned where the confessions came from. No one wondered why brave warriors would confess to crimes that meant their own death. Fear made people stop thinking, and that was exactly what Philip wanted. But there's compelling evidence that every single charge was fabricated. First, the charge about worshipping Baphomet had zero physical evidence to support it. No such idol was ever found in any Templar facility anywhere in Europe. The name never appeared in the order's rules or internal documents, not even once. It existed only in confessions extracted through torture. Second, when the Pope's own investigation was conducted in countries outside France, the results were completely different. In England, Spain, Germany, Italy, and Cyprus, virtually no Templars were found guilty of heresy. The outcome depended on one single factor: whether torture was used during interrogation. Countries that used torture got confessions. Countries that didn't use torture got no confessions. It was that simple. Third, King Edward II of England wrote directly to the Pope, stating clearly that he didn't believe the charges. He confirmed that all financial dealings between the English crown and the Templars had always been straightforward and honest. He even emphasized that the Templars had fought bravely alongside King Richard the Lionheart in defense of the Holy Land. But in France, any dissent was crushed without mercy. In May of 1310, 54 brave Templars withdrew their confessions. They stood before the investigating commission and declared they were innocent, that their earlier confessions were lies extracted through torture. Philip struck back instantly. He ordered all 54 burned alive as relapsed heretics. No further hearings, no judgment from the Papal Commission needed. The flames that consumed those 54 knights weren't just an execution, they were a message to every remaining Templar. Anyone who dares take back their confession will burn. After that, not a single Templar dared withdraw their confession again. Fear had done its job perfectly. All of this was a system designed from the ground up. Charges were fabricated to shock. Torture was used to force confessions. Confessions were broadcast to whip up the public. And burning at the stake was used to silence anyone brave enough to tell the truth. This wasn't justice. It was a machine of destruction. Powered by greed and the thirst for power, with religion as nothing more than a mask. This process dragged on for years, from 1307 onward. Dungeons across France filled with knights who had once been feared and revered, now reduced to shadows of their former selves. Bodies shattered by torture, spirits broken by despair. And the most painful truth of all, the ones who tortured the Templars weren't enemies of a different faith. They were people of the same religion, in the same country, under the same cross. In the medieval world, the Knights Templar didn't answer to any king. They weren't under any nation's law. They answered to one person and one person only, the Pope, the supreme head of the Roman Catholic Church, the man Christians worldwide believed was God's representative on earth. So the most important question is this: when his most loyal soldiers were arrested, tortured, and burned alive, what did their supreme commander do? Why did the Pope stay silent? The answer lies in the life of one man, a man named Bertrand de Gaulle, known to the world as Pope Clement V. Bertrand de Gaulle was born in the town of Villandreau in the Gascony region of southern France around 1264. He came from a noble family with deep ties to the church. His brother was the Archbishop of Lyon. He himself studied religious law at Orléans and Bologna, climbed to bishop, then rose to Archbishop of Bordeaux. A smooth career path anyone would envy. But the most important detail? He was French, and he knew King Philip IV personally. In 1304, Pope Benedict XI died after just a few months in office. Before that, Pope Boniface VIII, Philip's fierce enemy, had died in 1303 after being physically assaulted and humiliated by Philip's agents at Anagni in Italy, an event that shamed the Church across Europe. Now the papal throne was empty. Cardinals split into two camps, Italian and French, evenly matched, neither side budging. The papal election at Perugia dragged on for over a year. Finally, in June of 1305, Bertrand de Gaulle was elected as a compromise candidate. He wasn't Italian, he wasn't even a cardinal, and most importantly, he had the strong backing of King Philip IV. There are writings from a contemporary chronicler named Giovanni Villani claiming rumours that Bertrand had made a secret deal with Philip before his election. While there's no hard proof of any agreement, what happened afterward made it pretty clear that the new pope was firmly under the French king's influence. The coronation was held in Lyon in November 1305, not in Rome as tradition demanded. Philip himself attended in person. The grand ceremony turned ominous when a wall collapsed on spectators, killing several people, including the new pope's own brother and an elderly cardinal. Writers of the time saw it as a dark sign of things to come. Instead of going to Rome, Pope Clement V chose to stay in France, and in 1309 he moved the entire papal court to Avignon in southern France. This decision started what historians call the Avignon Papacy, or, more sarcastically, the Babylonian captivity, an era where popes would sit under the shadow of the French crown for 67 years, an era where spiritual authority was swallowed by worldly power. Picture the situation. The supreme leader of the church, who was supposed to be independent from worldly power, was now sitting within the territory of the most powerful king in Europe, a king who had already sent agents to physically assault the previous pope, a king with armies just days away from the papal residence. In that situation, when Philip arrested the Templars in October of 1307, Pope Clement V was in an incredibly difficult position. At first, he pushed back. He wrote to Philip questioning the arrests because the Templars answered to the Pope, not the king. Arresting them without papal approval was a serious violation of church authority. But his resistance didn't last long. Once the Templars' forced confessions went public, the mood shifted fast. Mobs in Paris demanded punishment for the blasphemers. Public pressure made it impossible for the Pope to stay silent. In November of 1307, he issued a papal decree ordering monarchs across Europe to arrest Templars in their territories and seize all assets. This was the turning point, because once the Pope gave the order, it was no longer just a French matter. It became a matter for the entire church. Templars across Europe were now in danger. But modern historians still debate whether Clement V was truly Philip's puppet or a leader desperately trying to keep his balance under enormous pressure. The evidence points both ways. On one hand, he tried to negotiate with Philip on several fronts. He refused to condemn Pope Boniface VIII as Philip demanded. He tried to pull the investigation under church authority rather than let the French crown run it alone. But, on the other hand, he gave in on the thing that mattered most, dissolving the Templar order. The investigation that had dragged on since 1307 entered its 5th year. Clement called the Council of Vienne in late 1311 to decide the Templars' fate. The commission that reviewed all the evidence concluded there wasn't enough proof to convict the Templars of heresy. Several cardinals argued the Templars should be allowed to defend themselves. And then Philip showed up at Vienne, in person, with his son and armed soldiers. His presence was a message that needed no words. Everyone in that room knew exactly what it meant. The verdict that had been leaning toward letting the Templars mount a defense was flipped immediately. On March 22, 1312, inside the Cathedral of Saint Maurice in Vienne, Philip and his son sat right next to the Pope as he announced the official dissolution of the Knights Templar. Under penalty of excommunication, no one was allowed to speak unless the Pope asked them to. Templars who had travelled to Vienne to defend their order weren't even permitted to present their case. That decree carried a telling detail. Clement didn't actually declare the Templars guilty. He dissolved the order on the grounds that it had fallen into such disrepute that it couldn't be reformed. That's a subtle but crucial difference. It meant that even the Pope himself didn't dare say the charges were true. He just destroyed the order to keep the political peace. A follow-up decree ordered all Templar assets transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, another military order. But in practice, Philip seized a massive chunk of Templar property in France, claiming it covered the costs of the proceedings. Even in England, the transfer to the Hospitallers was so delayed that by 1338 they still had only nominal control over former Templar lands. The moment that seal was pressed into that document, it wasn't just the end of an organization. It was one of the most cold-blooded betrayals in the history of the Church. The one person who was supposed to protect the Templars was the one who signed the paper that destroyed them. The one person every knight trusted as their last refuge turned his back at the moment they needed him most. Pope Clement V may not have been an evil man. He may have simply been a weak man trapped in a golden cage, pressured from every direction, by a powerful king, by bloodthirsty crowds, by a political situation with no way out. But the result was the same. Whether he surrendered out of weakness or cooperated willingly, the Knights Templar were destroyed just the same. And maybe that's the most painful lesson of all, that in the game of power, the silence of those who should protect you can destroy more than the swords of your enemies. If you were about to be burned alive, tied to a wooden stake in the middle of a public square, flames crawling up from below, smoke stinging your eyes and burning your throat, what would you do with your last breath? Beg for your life? Ask for mercy? Pray to God? A 70-year-old man named Jacques de Molay chose none of those. He chose something nobody expected. He chose to curse. This happened in March 1314, nearly 7 full years after the dawn raids of Friday, October 13th. 7 years that Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, spent locked in a French dungeon, his body wrecked by torture, his spirit battered by hopelessness. But somewhere beneath the scarred skin and broken bones, something still burned. De Molay was born around 1240 to 1250 to a family of minor nobility in the town of Molay in Burgundy. He joined the Templars young and rose through the ranks to become the 23rd Grand Master sometime before 1292. Throughout 7 years of imprisonment, de Molay was pressured into confessing. Early on, he gave in under the strain of torture. His confession was used as a key piece of evidence against the entire Templar order. But that confession ate away at him, like a wound that never healed. In March of 1314, the legal proceedings finally reached their end. On a platform in front of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, papal cardinals brought out Jacques de Molay along with Geoffroy de Charnay, the commander of Normandy, and 2 other Templar leaders, Hugues de Perrot, the visitor of France, and Godefroy de Gonville, the commander of Aquitaine. Before a massive crowd, the judges read the sentence. Based on the crimes the accused had confessed to and confirmed, the punishment was life in prison. Everyone figured the story was over. The Templar leaders would be sent back to their cells to rot in the dark for whatever time they had left. And then something no one saw coming happened. Jacques de Molay stood up. This old man who had endured 7 years of torture, whose body was so broken he could barely stand, he straightened himself in front of thousands of onlookers and spoke in a voice that was firm and clear. He withdrew every confession he had ever made. He declared the Knights Templar innocent. He said every charge was a lie, that his confessions were nothing but words forced out of him under unbearable pain. He said the only real crime he had committed was betraying his own order by confessing falsely to save his own life. Geoffroy de Charnay rose after him and retracted his confession as well. Shock rippled through the square in front of the cathedral. The presiding cardinals were thrown into confusion. The crowd erupted. What de Molay had done was essentially an act of rebellion against both the crown and the church. He knew exactly what it meant. Retracting a confession in a heresy case had only one meaning. The person who retracted would be classified as a relapsed heretic, and the sentence for a relapsed heretic was one thing only: death by fire. The news reached King Philip IV immediately. He didn't hesitate. The order came swiftly and decisively: burn them alive. No further hearing needed. No need to wait for a ruling from the Papal Commission. That same evening, Jacques de Molay and Geoffroy de Charnay were taken to a small island in the middle of the Seine, near Notre Dame. The woodpile was already stacked. The flames were ready. There's one detail that's particularly gut-wrenching. Records say the pyre for de Molay was built to burn slowly, not designed for a quick death like they usually were, but to drag out the agony as long as possible. The old man's body was tied to the stake. His hands were left free, because he had asked them to leave his hands unbound so he could hold them together in prayer. As the flames began to climb from below, as the heat crawled up his legs, as his skin blistered and the smell of burning flesh drifted across the execution ground, the crowd along the riverbanks cried out in horror and shock. But in the middle of the flames swallowing his body, de Molay didn't beg for his life. According to eyewitness accounts, he showed no fear. Instead, his voice rang out through the blaze. He declared that God would avenge the innocent, and he called on both Pope Clement V and King Philip IV to meet him before the judgment seat of God within 1 year. Now, to be fair, this curse story has multiple versions. Different chroniclers recorded different words. Some sources say the curse actually came from a different Templar, not de Molay himself. A chronicler named Ferretto of Vicenza recorded a similar story about a Neapolitan Templar who said these words directly to the Pope. And the most famous version comes from a French historical novel series called The Accursed Kings by Maurice Truand, written in the mid-20th century, which made the curse legend known worldwide. But regardless of the exact words, what happened next is undeniably chilling. Pope Clement V, who had bowed to Philip and signed the order dissolving the Templars, died on April 20th, 1314, barely a month and a half after de Molay was burned. The cause was a long illness, but the timing was too perfect for people to ignore. Legend has it that on the night the Pope's body lay in state inside a church, lightning struck and set the building on fire. By the time the flames were put out, the Pope's body was charred beyond recognition. Then came King Philip IV, the mastermind behind the Templars' destruction. On November 29th, 1314, less than a year after de Molay was burned, Philip suffered a sudden stroke while hunting near the palace of Fontainebleau. He died shortly after. He was just 46. Some records say he fell from his horse, broke his leg, and the wound got infected. Whatever the actual cause, both powers who destroyed the Templars were dead within the same year de Molay was executed. But the curse didn't stop there. Philip IV had 3 sons. All 3 became king after him in succession: Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV. But all 3 died quickly, without a male heir. Within just 14 years of Philip IV's death, the direct Capetian dynasty that had ruled for 300 years came to an end. The French throne passed to the House of Valois, and the fight over that throne lit the fuse for the 100 Years' War between France and England. A war that devastated both countries for more than a century. Was de Molay's curse real, or just a coincidence? No one can say for sure. What historians can tell you is that both the Pope and the French king did die within the same year, and the direct Capetian line did end within a few years after that. These facts are not in dispute. Whether you interpret them as divine punishment or a historical coincidence is up to you, but one thing that is definitely not a coincidence is the courage of one old man who chose to die rather than live with a lie. After 7 years of torture, after falsely confessing to save his own skin, de Molay chose to stand tall in his final moment. He chose an agonizing death on a burning pyre over spending his remaining days in a cell with a lie that dishonored every brother knight who ever served. The flames that consumed the body of Jacques de Molay that night went out long ago, but the spark of the question he lit still burns today. Where is justice when the ones in power are the accuser, the judge, and the executioner all in one? In 1119, 9 knights took their vows in Jerusalem to devote their lives to protecting pilgrims. They were so poor they had to share 1 horse between 2 men, living on donations and a fierce, burning faith. In 1314, nearly 200 years later, their last leader was burned alive in the heart of Paris. A 70-year-old body consumed by flames while a crowd watched in silence. The time between those 2 events is packed with faith, wealth, power, greed, betrayal, and a curse that echoes across the centuries. But when you strip away every layer of this story, the truth turns out to be far simpler than any legend ever told. The Knights Templar weren't wiped out because of black magic. They weren't destroyed for worshipping demons. They didn't fall because of secret rituals or betraying Christ. Every single one of those charges was a tool built on purpose, carefully designed to spark fear and disgust among a public that mostly couldn't read, to cover up the one real motive: money. Look at the whole picture and it becomes clear. King Philip IV of France, known as the Iron King, was massively in debt to the Templars. His treasury was bleeding dry from wars with England and Flanders. The kingdom's annual income couldn't keep up with the mounting debt. He had already used the exact same playbook on the Lombard bankers and the Jews. Find a charge, arrest, seize, eliminate. Both times it worked perfectly. Money poured in, debts vanished. No one dared push back. The Templars were simply target number 3, the biggest, the richest, and the most dangerous, which is why they needed the most extreme charges to bring them down. Every confession used as evidence was extracted through torture, through pulling out fingernails, stretching bodies on the rack, roasting feet over open flames, denying sleep and food until the mind dissolved. In countries that didn't use torture, virtually no Templars were found guilty. The idol Baphomet, supposedly worshipped by the Templars, was never found in any Templar facility anywhere in Europe. It was never mentioned in the order's rules or internal documents, not once. Even Pope Clement V himself didn't dare declare the Templars guilty of heresy. He chose the words that the order had fallen into such disrepute it could not be reformed, which was basically admitting the charges were never proven. So where did the Templars' massive fortune go? According to the Pope's decree, all assets were supposed to go to the Knights Hospitaller, another military order still in operation. But in reality, Philip grabbed a huge chunk of Templar property in France, claiming it covered the costs of the trial. Records show Philip received 200,000 livres, and his son got another 50,000 directly from Templar assets. Huge numbers, sure, but far less than expected given the Templars' legendary wealth. The surprising truth is that the cash found in Templar fortresses was way less than anyone anticipated. So much less that even Philip himself must have been disappointed. Most of the Templars' wealth wasn't in gold or coins you could grab. It was in loans, land, and letters of credit. When the order was dissolved, the loans people owed to the Templars had no one left to collect them. The letters of credit had no one to honor them. It was like smashing a bank. The money didn't disappear. The system that held it together collapsed. And when the system collapsed, all the value evaporated with it. This fact makes the legend of hidden Templar treasure pretty hard to believe, because most of the treasure was never gold in the first place. The fallout from the Templar purge didn't stay in France. It sent shockwaves across Europe. The financial system the Templars had built over nearly 200 years fell apart. The letters of credit that once made traveling across continents safe were gone. The vaults that once safeguarded the treasures of kings and nobles were sealed and confiscated. The Knights Hospitaller, watching what happened to the Templars, decided to get out of the banking business entirely, afraid they'd be next. Europe lost its most powerful financial institution overnight, and it would take centuries before a banking system of comparable scale replaced it. But not every country followed the purge obediently. And this is the clearest proof that the crackdown had nothing to do with the Templars' guilt and everything to do with each ruler's self-interest. In Portugal, the king simply renamed the Templars to the Order of Christ in 1319, keeping nearly all the original members and property. The Templars in Portugal didn't actually disappear. They just changed their name and put on new cloaks. The Order of Christ went on for centuries and played a key role in Portugal's age of exploration. In Spain, the Order of Montesa was set up to absorb Templar members in a similar way. In England, King Edward II treated the Templars leniently, letting many live comfortably with a pension and no torture. All of this hammers home the point. The Templar purge was never about guilt or innocence. It was about politics and money. Countries that weren't in debt to the Templars had no reason to destroy them. Countries whose kings saw value in keeping the Templars alive found ways to keep them. Only France under Philip chose the path of blood. Because only Philip owed so much that he needed to destroy his creditor. If the heresy charges were real, why were the Templars in Portugal still operating normally under a new name? Why were the Templars in England never convicted? The answer is obvious. Because the charges were never real to begin with. The legends of Templar mystery that survive to this day, hidden treasure buried in deep caves or remote islands, the Holy Grail protected across centuries, secret rituals passed down through underground societies. All of these have been embellished by countless legends, movies, and novels until they've become bigger than reality. They're nothing but the long shadow of an effort to bury a simple, shameful truth. That a greedy man wearing a crown dared to use God's name as a weapon to rob and murder innocent people. Mystery was manufactured so people would forget a truth that was never mysterious at all. So what are the lessons from all of this? Lesson 1. Wealth without political protection is dangerous. The Templars were insanely rich, 9,000 estates, tens of thousands of members, a financial system centuries ahead of its time. None of it could shield them from a king who decided they had to go. Because financial power and political power are two different things, and when they collide, the one holding the sword and the courtroom always beats the one holding the ledger and the letter of credit. Lesson 2. Torture never leads to truth. It only leads to what the torturer wants to hear. Confessions extracted through torture are worthless as truth, but they're priceless as propaganda. When people are forced to say what those in power want, those words are nothing more than a script written in advance. This lesson is still relevant in the 21st century. Lesson 3. People would rather believe something exciting than something boring. Stories about black magic, demons, and perverted rituals are way more interesting than stories about debt, budgets, and a king's ordinary greed. That's why the mysterious legends keep getting retold to this day, while the truth stays buried under layers of stories that are just more fun to tell. And the final lesson, maybe the most important one of all. The question that Jacques de Molay left the world as the flames consumed his body. In today's world, driven by capital, do you think there are still groups of people who've built enormous wealth? Who've created multinational empires, built financial networks bigger than governments, with influence over the global economy, who are right now being watched by those in power with hungry, hungry eyes, waiting for the day they can find a charge and take everything? History doesn't teach us who's right and who's wrong. It only teaches us that everyone always believes they're right. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying thing of all. The black box is now closed. See you next time. Goodbye.